So, hello and welcome to the New Gig podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Hodgson, and today I'm delighted to be joined by the Vice President of Communications for the John Locke Foundation, all the way from Raleigh, North Carolina. It's Brooke Medina. How are you doing, Brooke?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. I am so excited to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure. And let's start from the beginning. Basically, say a little bit about yourself, your own journey, and also the work that you're doing with the John Locke Foundation at the moment.
Yes, so my background is in government, public policy, studied that in college, was in the nonprofit space for quite some time, and then I actually did my own gig and freelance work for 14 years, and that was called being a stay-at-home mom and homeschooling my children.
Yeah.
And then went back to the public policy world in the think tank space. And so I've been at the John Locke Foundation, which is a free market center-right think tank here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so we focus on just making sure that North Carolina stays free. We focus on budget and taxes and that policy at the state level, as well as like energy policy, education, keeping education widely available and innovative for kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. And then just a host of other policy issues, agriculture, which is our top industry here in North Carolina. So we are a busy think tank, but North Carolina is a very fast growing area and state. We definitely have had a lot of inbound migration, so that keeps us on our toes here.
Yeah, absolutely. And when your communications role as well here at Brooke, how is the change been manifesting itself in terms of more of a focus on digital channels and just basically trying to use what's available to get the message out there?
Yeah, that has been revolutionary. I mean, we all know this. They call it the digital revolution for a reason.
Yeah.
But the way in which the digital landscape has just undergone this metamorphosis, even in the past 3 to 5 years, is exceptional. It's really, really exciting, and it gives us the tools that we need to be able to reach Americans all across the country, or specifically in North Carolina, if we need to micro target. The advanced tools that we have, the way that marketers can work even in the nonprofit space to be able to micro target or geofence around particular areas so that you can reach the right person with the right message is exceptional. I mean, it's really exciting. Some people do say, though, that it's a little scary, too, on the other hand, because there is all of this tracking that's going on. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to have these dialogues about the need for privacy and user experience and how to improve that. And I think a lot of that comes down to educating users, on their iPhone. How are you setting up your settings? What do you want third parties to have access to so that you can have targeted ads that suit what you're looking for? But what do you absolutely want, like no interference? And so I think that this is part of just the questions and answers we get to grapple with in this digital economy. And so I'm really excited about how we work in this space in the public policy front, making sure that government stays at bay and doesn't overregulate, while also understanding what's our relationship with the consumer and how do you honor and respect their privacy while also giving them what they actually do want. I like scrolling Instagram and seeing ads that are tailored toward me. So I want them to have that data, but I also don't want them to know the names of my children and my dogs. So there's a fine line.
I think there definitely is, but I agree with you on that. There's nothing worse than advertising for things that's completely irrelevant, or when people spam you with sort of either messages on social media or over email, trying to sell services that you've got no interest in whatsoever. And I think that, with a little bit of tailoring and targeting, to be actually sort of made aware of what's out there and things you are interested in, I see that as a positive thing as well. So I'm with you on those kind of things as well, Brooke, in terms of make it tailored to me, my needs and my requirements. But always stay at arm's length as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that this is even just a conversation that people are having within their own friendships or their communities, like how much information do I share versus what do I keep private? And especially I would say those who are digital migrants. So those of us who remember a time where the internet was not ubiquitous and we
Yes.
actually had like dial up. Yeah, I remember that too.
Put my hand
I
up.
remember when AOL came out. I'm dating myself here, but let's just be honest.
Yeah.
And so there have been so many transitions during this time, and it's been iterative in many ways, but kind of like Amara's law talks about, oftentimes we overestimate the impact of technology in the short run, but we underestimate it in the long run. And that is
Yes.
certainly the case with the internet. I am glad I live in 2023. I think the digital world is incredible. I
Yeah.
like the ability to be able to access the information I need. But I think we're also learning, how do we live well during this time and in this period? And that goes back to even like ancient classical political philosophy of, what
Right.
is the good life? What does that look like in the digital world even?
Yeah.
And government's going to try to answer that question for us. And so that's where I would say the innovators, those who are freelancers, who are working in the gig economy, that are working alongside of maybe some bigger businesses as contractors,
Yeah.
this is an opportunity for them to kind of stand outside of those institutions, but also speak into them and give them some guidance on the impact this is having on the everyday person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on that track there, we're seeing sort of huge impacts in terms of the role of digitalization, the role of technology on the labor market and work. And as you say, there's more opportunities than ever has been before. But also, there's the more of the invasion into the average daily life, and the sort of blurring of what is work, what is professional, and what is
Mhm.
private is seems to be continually blurred more and more as time goes on.
Oh, that is so true. And I think that actually is leading to a lot of burnout.
Right.
Right now, the technology sector in particular is going through a moment. And although here in the US, only about 2% of jobs are considered technology jobs, I mean, we still have so much in retail and healthcare and education. But there is such pressure to keep up and to be ahead of the next curve and to think like a
Right.
futurist, which I think is great. I like to try and think like a futurist. You're looking at these trajectories and you're forecasting to the degree that you can. But sometimes there is just a time and space where we have to build room for rest. And I think if we don't do it ourselves, external forces will do it for us. And even
Mm,
like I mentioned, the technology industry right now, especially in the US, but maybe in the UK too, and
mm,
in the broader European Union, we're experiencing a lot of layoffs. I mean, Amazon, Microsoft,
absolutely.
Meta.
Yeah.
Um, and this is part of that boom and bust cycle that economists recognize. I mean, the 2001 tech bust, there's a 2008 one, and now we're experiencing this shaking out again. And I think it's an opportunity, even though it's difficult when people lose their jobs, but it's
Yeah.
also an opportunity to engage in some creative destruction. What does this look like in
Yeah.
2025, 2030?
Mm,
And if we're so busy in that rat race, we don't take the time to ask those questions sometimes.
mm.
So perhaps there's a new horizon right around the corner.
I think it's probably a great thing to be able to unlock, because I think that what you're saying there is reflecting the views of a lot of people. It's kind of this overload. It's a increasing number of channels. You need to be sort of stay ahead of the game in terms of what's happening, as you say, as a futurist, but also to take part as well, to be able to be seen, to be engaged in the different channels as well, with an increasing audience in most cases as well. And it's, as you say, it's very time consuming, it's very tiring, and also sort of creates such a sort of pressure on individuals.
Yes, and that I would say is really where data analytics is important. Looking at how is my audience engaging with me? Where are they meeting me at? Where can I meet them at?
Yeah.
Where is that target audience that I really want to engage with? For example, here at the John Locke Foundation, some of my work is centered around reaching North Carolinians whose primary language is Spanish. And so there are a lot of men and women and children who are immigrating here from Central and South America. And so looking at what channels are they using? What platforms do they engage in? At what time of day? What information is most meaningful to them? What are they clicking on? And just understanding this is the user experience as they're showing me through the data that I have in front of me on my Google Analytics, on my Facebook Analytics. And so being responsive to that, I think, is really important. And also being willing to say, well, they're not engaging with me on this platform, or it's like it has very low ROI.
Yeah.
So in that case, my time is better spent reinvesting that time in the platforms that they're actually using. We should not try to constantly push a round peg into a square. There are times when it is okay to quit something so that you can start something new. And that's part of the exciting aspect of being in the tech space and looking at what's ahead on the digital horizon. It is going to be highly disruptive at times. But I also think we humans haven't changed a whole lot over the thousands of years. I mean, we still have some very basic needs. And I would say part of it is just like we want to be known by the people that we want to be known by. We want to be loved. We want to be spoken to with respect. And so those are things that will transcend platforms. I can show people respect on LinkedIn as well as on Twitter. I don't change who I am based on the platform I'm using. And companies shouldn't change who they are based on those platforms. We have seen companies, especially in the US, we've seen companies like Nike, as well as like the NBA, change who they are or who they pretend to be when they're going to maybe communist China. And so it's like they have kind of forsaken a lot of principles, and oftentimes we lose respect for companies like that. And we want to make sure, just like we as individuals have this sort of integrity of being consistent with who we are in the digital space, but also encouraging companies and nonprofits to maintain that integrity too.
And that's it. That authenticity, I think, is so crucial, because it's hard fought but easily lost by taking the missteps. And I think that trying to appeal to everyone, you're always going to appeal to no one. And I think sort of be true to what you believe in and the thoughts and ideas. And I think that, as you say, within the think tank space, this is crucial. You can't have all the sweets in the jar. You can't keep everyone happy. But I think that be able to stand up for what you stand up for, argue your case, and actually sort of give some hopefully reasoned recommendations behind that as well. And people, even if they don't agree, they can respect you for that, hopefully.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of living in a pluralist society, is the fact that I might not agree with my colleague or my neighbor about everything. But that's okay. I mean, there are some fundamental principles that I think must be agreed on in a free society, such as the value of freedom. It's important. It's non-negotiable.
Absolutely.
And that each individual has inherent dignity and worth in and of themselves. They're not the right or the property of the state. Our rights do not come from the government. But once we agree on those principles, beyond that, it's I would say it's beauty in our diversity that we should be channeling and celebrating. And so I would hope, whether here in the US or in the EU, we're seeing this rise of authoritarianism. And I would hope that many citizens in these countries begin to kind of stir out of their slumber. And I think we're starting to see it. I mean, even countries in Iran, we're seeing these uprisings and this pushback because people weren't made to operate that way under this harsh thumb of government. And so I think that's a critical element, that as we continue to digitize a lot of our lives, and a lot of our life is lived online, and we do seek to be authentic, we also have to bear in mind the encroachment of government is oftentimes very subtle, depending on what kind of policies are being proposed. And so we need to be very mindful of what's around the corner and keeping our ears to the rail on the policy front to make sure that government isn't sliding in additional regulations that are going to inhibit our freedoms.
Yeah, and absolutely true, because we're seeing this slow creep, and in some cases not so slow creep, of this idea that sort of governments know best. We're going to sort of take your money. We know best how to spend it. We know the policies that are going to benefit you, and this kind of I say so. This nanny state mentality, which I think there's certain people who just sort of get so confused by everyday life that they want someone to take care of everything. But the majority of people, as you say, this independence, this liberty, and this freedom is fundamental, and the ability to choose what, when, and how they do things is fundamental to this. And I think that people don't like this, and we're seeing here in the European Union now, we're seeing a little bit in the Netherlands, we've seen a little bit in the UK, people standing up against this established state-run narrative, particularly when it's pushed in such a way that it's obviously wrong. And I think that these things that are out there can't be put back in the bottle. I think it needs to be dealt with, and more power to it, if you ask me.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. That's the thing. Government is really quick to take power. They are very loath and very slow, if at all, to ever relinquish it. This is why we fight so hard against government-run programs or additional taxes at the John Locke Foundation. And I know many of the other groups that your organization and mine are affiliated with. We recognize history has taught us that government will not usually willingly give back up power or taxations or anything of those nature unless people push back, and it is much harder to put Pandora back in her box.
Yeah, absolutely. And how are things going in the US in terms of the big debate about remote work, getting back to the office, hybrid work? Is it 2 days? Is it 3 days? Is it full time? How is that shift going over time? Because, of course, through the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen that technology can fill in a lot of the gaps in a lot of these kind of things, take away the sort of the commute. But what's the general feeling you're getting at the moment on your side of the pond?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, probably more interesting than people recognize on its face. In part, well, just here's some statistics. Some numbers are, before the COVID-19 pandemic, about 3% of the workforce in the US was working from home.
Wow.
At the height of the pandemic, it was up to, I think, 61%. And then now it's kind of leveled off to about 30%. So I would certainly say remote work or hybrid work is here to stay. I think most companies are properly referred to as hybrid rather than complete remote, because oftentimes they'll still make their employees come in maybe even twice a year to meetings. Which I think is healthy in many cases, depending on the job. And I would imagine, especially among Gen Z, a lot of them want to be in the office compared to those who are maybe 50 or above, who have already established set of network. And so it's easier for them to work fully remote. But I would say with like the rise in the tech layoffs right now, and for example, Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Meta, said that their company is flattening, and so they're removing a lot of middle management. And there are some expectations for people to return more into the office. There have been like 5 and 10-year leases that were signed before COVID, and these offices are going unused in many cases. And so I would say they're looking for efficiencies, and if that means making sure that their workforce is more in the office, utilizing the space that they're already paying for, rather than paying them a stipend for a home office and things. I think that's kind of a place that we're in momentarily, but I do think the long-term trend is going to be much more hybrid work. That will be the standard. This 30% of Americans that are working hybrid right now, I see that going on, if not increasing over the years as we continue to dematerialize in our economy.
Yeah. And this seems to be also the way in which sort of the world's working. More of our interactions are digital. And of course, we're speaking in Stockholm, Sweden, and Raleigh, North Carolina, over digital means at the moment. So it's got a lot of positive elements to it. But there's also individuals themselves need to be able to educate themselves on how to use these new channels, how to use the technology. And it's, nothing that's really sort of taught in schools yet, sadly. It's a case of learn by doing and keeping yourself up to date with the latest channels, the latest communications. So, of course, the way we speak like this is very different than you speak on Twitter or over Instagram. So kind of honing your messages and being able to have the biggest impact over the different channels is crucial. And of course, people like you and I are very much in demand to be able to squeeze the most out of this.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, though, because it is such a gift to be able to have these ways in which we can connect face to face, even if we're not in the same room, flesh and blood.
Yeah.
It is a gift, but it also provides this new challenge for people who are especially crossing generations or crossing cultures to learn someone else's digital body language. I'm actually reading a book right now called Digital Body Language, and it just talks about just either the age gap or the cultural gap in the way we respond to text messages even. Whereas one person might finish their text, they might just respond with okay, period. And then maybe a younger colleague perceives that as passive aggressive because it had a period at the end. There was no like exclamation point or emoji. And so I think that's part of the challenge right now too. And as we increase in our hybrid and remote work options, figuring out organizational culture and learning within like those Slack channels or the Discord channels, how do I interact with my colleagues who have never met face to face? What does a digital work culture look like? What is the preferred digital body language within this organization? Those are questions we're grappling with right now, and we will only continue to, I think. But it's okay. It's worth engaging and undertaking that big task because I think it's going to lead to better continuity and collegiality in the future, especially as we stay more remote like this.
Yeah, the way it's looking as time goes on, it's not disappearing, but we need to harness it in the best way. And with all this new technology and new tools around, Brooke, what does this mean for classical liberalism? I mean, you and I are sort of supporting and flying the flag, but is this a challenge or is it a facilitator? Is this sort of playing into more of the classical liberal thinking and the tenets that should be the foundations of our society?
Oh, that's a good question. I like that. And it's worth considering. I would say just a couple of ways in which I think that this could benefit classical liberalism in that approach to not only the economy, but the human person is that people have a lot more freedom to take on a few different projects at a time. So they're not committed to just one employer. They have the flexibility and the freedom to engage in freelance work and sort of tailor their own vocation in a way that reflects what they value and what they care about. They have more liberty on that front. Classical liberalism, though, also understands the importance of civil society, and that's those mediating institutions that sit between the individual and the government. And so that's the family, the neighborhood, the higher education institutions. And so I think this is an opportunity for classical liberals to think in terms of market disruption on the education front, for example, or even in the religious institution front. Over COVID, people went to online churches, for example, and how do you foster community? Even as a classical liberal who believes in the importance of individualism but limited government, like how do you foster that community if you're advocating for the government to shrink a little bit more, but you know that people aren't islands unto themselves. They do need one another. And so I think that is both a challenge and an opportunity for classical liberals in this moment as we're championing deregulation or smart regulation in certain sectors. We should be thinking about, okay, well, if we remove government barriers in this way, where does civil society get to step in and prop up or help or come alongside of those people who genuinely are struggling because maybe they don't have the social capital yet, or maybe they are just a country that is transitioning into more first world enterprises. And so those are the opportunities, I think, for classical liberalism, so long as we can stay persuasive and I would say stay at the table.
Yes.
That's really important for classical liberals in particular. It can feel like you're fighting an uphill battle in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
The bureaucracy is huge. Government has tons of money to fight tooth and nail against these principles.
Yeah.
And we can either throw up our hands in frustration, or we can get, roll up our sleeves and show up at the table and continue to
Yes.
be that voice that is championing free market principles.
Absolutely. And I think that I will be joining you at that table with my sleeves well and truly rolled up to make sure these things happen. I must admit, Brooke, it's a good way of approaching these things. And what's your sort of thoughts for the future in terms of the role of technology, the labor market, and just the way that things will sort of pan out with your futurist hat on at the moment?
Okay, well, let's see. I'm not the best at predicting presidential candidates, so I'm just going to say my futurism only goes so far here. But I would say we are going to, of course, see an increase in the use of AI, the large language models, ChatGPT. Again, I'm going to refer back to Amara's law. I do think there are times when people say this is going to completely disrupt everything in like the copywriting and marketing space, or academics. Everyone's going to write their essays with ChatGPT. I don't think that's the case.
No.
But I also think that what we have witnessed ever since the beginning of 2023 on the AI front, we don't fully appreciate or realize the effects that's going to have on our lives in 10, 20 years. So I think that's something to watch, is just what people create on that front, but also how governments seek to regulate things on the tech front. Of course, we see it with social media companies, the attempt to quell free speech by jawboning tech companies, making them try to serve the needs of the government. So there's that component to it that I think we're going to see an uptick in attempts at regulation. On the business front, of course, we're seeing lots more government intervention. You and I wrote a piece together on the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the subsidies that Europe has tried to offer. So we're going to see more challenges on that front too. But I also think there is a decentralization coming with Web3 as that becomes more integrated into our lives, and people are valuing privacy a lot more. And so I think that's another part of technologies you're going to see, like encryption and encrypted messages are going to just be commonplace. I mean, there will be no other option. And so making sure that people have the privacy they need, especially as governments try to clamp down.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that it's going to be a long road, but it's, as you were saying before, people underestimate some things and they overestimate other things. And I think this sort of the small stuff at the moment has been building up, and we see these big changes, but life needs to continue. And I think sort of what comes with the good comes with the bad, but let's pick out the best bits. And on balance, it's usually technology gives us more than it takes away. And it's just a case of adapting to the reality and seeing what's going on. But I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights, but also to share some of the fantastic work that you're doing as well in the John Locke Foundation. And long may it continue.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Glenn. And I appreciate your audience taking the time to listen to this discussion. And yeah, I'm looking forward to more talks like this in the future.
Absolutely. Very welcome to. Excellent. Well, thank you, and speak again soon.